All right. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. And today I've got one of my favorite little influencers on social media. This guy has some great insights into what's going on in politics, especially here in California. I'm guessing he's also a Californian just like me. And we're going to talk a little bit about the politics that's going on and kind of how it's affecting real estate. I know it's a little bit different for Max, but I wanted to thank him for coming on. Max Bonilla, like I said, if you follow him on social media, you'll know what I'm talking about. He has some great perspectives and a lot of good insight as to what's going on. And so, Max, thanks for joining me.
I appreciate you for having me on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, man. So, why don't you give us a little bit of backstory about you and kind of what you've been doing over the last year or so with social media?
Yeah, why not? So, I post videos about laws, bills, legislation. I like to read through code. I like to study court decisions, so that's common law as well, and I enjoy that because we've had a fair bit of that this week through the U.S. Supreme Court. Just the precedents that are being set. And I enjoy disseminating that information to people. And what I do is I take that, I try to summarize it in about a minute and a half video, and then it goes online for basically the entire world to see if they want to.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, you do such a great job of disseminating the information because a lot of the times looking at court documents, listening to what the summary is, it's confusing, and you really don't understand what's going to happen to us from a perspective of how it affects us as Californians and Americans. It's funny you brought up the Supreme Court. There's a lot going on there, right?
Yeah, this week they handed down three crucial decisions. They handed down the Chevron decision. And now, Chevron doctrine is a huge deal because back in '84, the Supreme Court said that any sort of like law and the way that you interpret that is supposed to be based on the way that an executive branch either writes it out or rewrites it. So basically, you have the administrative state, you have the bureaucracy, and basically, they're ultimately the ones that get to interpret that. I guess what Democrats back in the day were saying, I think Anna Gorsuch, she's the mom of Neil Gorsuch, who's currently sitting on the Supreme Court. She had made a lot of decisions for the agency that she was working with just single-handedly. And I don't like this because it gives the executive branch the ability to interpret the law instead of the judiciary, the judicial branch.
Yeah.
And so that was a powerful doctrine that was actually struck down. So now the judges are going to be the ones interpreting, laws passed by Congress now again, instead of agencies like the CDC or the
The
Environmental
EPA.
Protection
Yep.
Agency. Yeah, all those agencies, they were the ones that had the power to do that, and I think that's too much power. You also had the January 6th obstruction cases. Now you have something called judicial scrutiny, where I don't know if the special counsel and Jack Smith are going to be dropping these cases, but at least they have more scrutiny to show that this narrow definition of obstruction that was just established by the Supreme Court fits with these cases that they're now prosecuting. And then now they've just granted Donald Trump presidential immunity, not full presidential
No.
immunity,
Yeah.
because obviously you have acts that are associated with the office and acts that are not yet to be defined by the lower courts.
Right. So yeah, I mean, let's jump into the Chevron deference, right? So obviously, with that, it gave a lot of power to the bureaucracy, a lot of the back end three-letter agencies
Right.
to determine kind of and interpret some vagueness. Now, a question for you I had was there's some I guess discourse or at least understanding that we're trying to figure out, does it go back to the court to decide what that vagueness means, or is it supposed to be pushed back to Congress or Senate who passed the law to make it more specific?
Yeah, so the court is supposed to interpret it, but then at the same time, you could have the court make a decision, then Congress or the Senate could act to change it or to make it, defined a specific way. So,
Right. So, I mean,
that's
it's
the
not
pushback.
necessarily taking more of it because, I mean, one of the things that we've heard is that it's a huge power grab for the Supreme Court. They're going
Mhm.
to be making decisions on things that they may not understand or know. But in actuality, what it's going to do is it puts it back into their court, and they can be like, "Look, no, this is not what this means. We need a little bit more transparency as far as what it means. So let's get it from Congress and Senate, the people who actually made the bill."
Yeah, that means they can strike down a lot of rules and executive orders and things that are essentially made to rewrite laws, which is
Right,
what
and
they're doing
and
a
we
lot
all
right now.
understand that the executive branch has grown enormously with a lot of these three-letter agencies. So one of the things that obviously this could impact is the EPA. And one of the things that we deal with in real estate, especially with affordability, is building new homes, right? And
Yeah.
so a lot of the problem that we see is that the cost to build a new home has risen so much that the starting price for a home isn't affordable for 75% of the US population. So talking about this and understanding that it's going to maybe limit how much the EPA can do you see that possibly lowering some of those costs, those fees associated with things that the EPA is enforcing and putting out there?
hmm Yeah, a lot of those fees are highly contingent on rules that are established by the EPA. So basically, it's been nationalized, federalized, centralized, and I think what the Supreme Court did is they said, now let's take it back to the courts. You might end up fighting maybe the state a little bit more than the feds now because you've got the California Air Resources Board, you've got plenty of environmental and energy regulation in the state. But the good news, though, is that the courts will be able to strike down some of these rules that are being put out by the feds, and I think that that would help lower costs. The less environmental regulation, the more whatever savings people are getting from that is going to trickle down ultimately to the consumers.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a really great point. I mean, a lot of what it seems like the federal courts are doing, the Supreme Court's doing right now, is putting a lot of the decision making back into the states, where it's a little bit more localized because obviously, national laws are going to, come from, Washington D.C. may not really understand what the issues are in your state. So obviously, I mean, it seems like the federal courts, the Supreme Court's doing a pretty good job of kind of putting the power back into the states and a little bit less people involved, less hands in the pot, and a little bit easier for them to make decisions that actually affect their constituencies.
Yeah, exactly. They can, in fact, there's a lot of stuff that they send back to the lower courts. You might have the district courts deal with it. The DC district court tends to be liberal. Also know that the district court for, the number nine, which is I think state of California, Washington, Oregon, is also pretty Democrat. But that means that if you have any real issues there, that the Supreme Court will probably step in and say, no, that's them exercising power that they don't have.
Gotcha. So I mean, they're making the Supreme Court a little bit busier with this. So
Right.
one of the things that I would like to talk about, and we mentioned it up first, in California, one of the biggest issues is affordability. I think the average home sales price is $776,000, which a lot of people in California can't afford. And obviously, we've had a lot of decisions made about minimum wage, making it livable wage, and we're seeing the impact of that and how it's affecting fast food companies and their ability to hire people or at least leave people on the books because the cost is so high that these owners of these small franchise businesses can't afford to make a profit, which in a capitalist society that's what they need to do, is make a profit so that they can pay their employees and actually
Right.
run a business. But my question to you is, one of the things that I saw, or at least I thought I understood, was the recent ballot initiative that had been taken off by Newsom and his cronies, dealing with the fact that they were kind of redefining fees as taxes, and that tax uh, issue was going to be on a ballot measure, but it's been removed.
Yeah, that's correct. There's something called the Taxpayer Protection Act that had all those issues on it, and these were taxpayers expressing their grievances and trying to make it so that they could actually have a voice and vote on some of these taxes being passed by the legislature and or their local government, like cities, county boards, before they actually became law, before they were actually mandatory. And yeah, now that's been taken off through not through the U.S. Supreme Court, but through the state Supreme Court.
Now I got a question for you. Is that dead, or is that something that still has some legs on it and we may still see it come back?
I would love to see them try to take it up all the way to SCOTUS. I would
Yeah.
love to see that happen, but as of right now, it's dead. As of
Gotcha.
right now, it's gone. Unless we see further litigation, which I've heard nothing about, it's
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah, that's a shame because I mean, like I said, one of the things that we deal with in real estate is a lot of the fees associated with zoning, building, and so like I said, it brings up the cost to build so exorbitant
Mhm.
that it really leaves builders small margin to be able to build homes at a decent price for people to be able to afford. And
Yeah.
again, we're talking about the government really stepping in and adding a lot of overlays and a lot of extra stuff that makes it very difficult for us to be able to build housing. Now that we're talking about housing, let's talk about the recent homelessness or homeless issue that SCOTUS brought up. Um, Now, from my understanding, SCOTUS basically said, "Look, we're going to leave it back to the city and counties and states to decide whether to enforce these homeless encampment rules." Correct?
Yeah, so basically cities and states don't have to find a shelter to be able to, remove homeless encampments from public properties and parks. Basically, they can just put them somewhere else, so to speak. Not necessarily solving the problem, but at
No.
least taking them off of a busy street corner or a place where a lot of members of the public are actually passing by. So this is stuff that has impacted states for years, including this one. Um, and I have given the governor, a little bit of like breathing room when it comes to this one because this was actual legal precedent that was preventing certain homeless removal, certain kinds of it at least. Now I know that there are a lot of people that are like, well, there's no excuse with the money we've spent and the money we've thrown at it. Well, I don't know why, if we're complaining about that kind of precedent, we'd even be making that kind of big investment and throwing so much money at the issue if there's truly nothing we can do about it. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
like, I don't know why we would do that in the first place. So there is that fact that we've wasted about $24 billion over the last 5 or 6 years just on this issue. But at the end of the day, now they really have no excuse. What are they going to say to the people when now there are no legal barriers to removing homelessness at all, or to the homeless at all?
Yeah. No, and I mean that's we talk about housing, we talk about real estate. The obviously a major issue in California is the homelessness problem, and there's got to be some sort of solution when it comes to real estate as far as
Mhm.
housing for the homeless. So you're right. You're right. Like there's no real barrier for them to really start working on stuff. However, I did hear and there was a social media post about some of the homeless shelters that were being built and the cost for per unit. So I don't know if you'd seen that, but there was a gentleman who was down, I think in Riverside, and he had gone to one of the areas where they had put in different homeless like homes, small tiny homes, and I guess the cost per unit was about 730,000 per unit, and we're talking about shack sheds that you can purchase at Home Depot for a couple grand.
I can't hear you anymore. I don't know why that
Uh-oh.
is. Uh-oh.
Let me see.
Let's see. Uh-oh. All right. Okay.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. No. So that's all right. So I'll get back to the question. The question was, there's someone been talking about the cost for some of the homeless units that were being built. I think it was an average price of about $730,000 per unit.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, yeah. In Los Angeles, I think they were spending about 670,000 in some high rise that they were constructing. So, yeah, it's not really affordable housing. In Santa Monica, making 1 million,
Yeah, and
and
I think that one of the biggest problems is that what we're seeing is the zoning laws that go in a lot of the local governance, and some of the not in my backyard. So I mean, one of the issues that I think California is seeing is that we're unwilling to build affordable housing. Especially, nobody has any idea where it's going to be built. So what we're seeing is a big issue with being able to build how produce housing that is affordable because there's nobody who wants it in their backyard. So, I mean, what's the solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to bring back mental asylums, and I think we need to have specific places for them. And I think that will require a lot of coordination on the part of the 58 counties that are in the state, and that'll require a lot of coordination with cities that are incorporated, right? Because I think the incorporated areas obviously have more jurisdiction over stuff that happens there than the counties do. The counties really are in charge more of the unincorporated parts. And so we need them to be able to get a, to pass ordinances in agreement to be able to establish these, these mental asylums to say, hey, we're okay with putting it in this spot here. And I think that part of that involves treating people for with their substance abuse and addiction issues, whether they like it or not. Because I think that we've gone beyond the point of like just letting we can't just let people die on the streets, and that's what we've been doing for years. We've just been letting them die and calling that compassion,
Right.
because progressives, they don't want to they don't want to force treatment on the homeless because they look at that as inhumane, coercive. But I think it's much more inhumane to let them inject themselves on the streets than to die. And so I'd say, let's put them in these institutions. Let's treat them whether they want it or not, and then try to make them useful members of society, equip them to um, join the labor force, hopefully. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, right, when you get to that point, it's up to them. But the whole goal behind that is to get the treatment that they need.
Treat the underlying problem.
Right, treat the underlying problem, which usually is substance abuse, and that is something that progressives tend to deny as well, is that there is that underlying problem, and it's not just an assumption that's being made, it's an actual issue. Um, I don't come across a lot of homeless people that are with it mentally or that are sober minded. I hardly.
It's
It's
a
not an
small
encounter I
percentage.
usually have. Yeah, it's a pretty small percentage, and so that's why I'm like, just never mind what they say as far as their data, but just from firsthand experiences, I know it's hard to come across that.
Yeah, no, and I would agree. I've done some work with my church, and we've gone to parks around here locally and fed some of the homeless and spoken to them. And a lot of the times, you get the rare story where
Yeah.
it's a family of five living out of their car because they couldn't afford. Someone lost their job, but in actuality, a majority of it is mental health, as far as being addicted to drugs, which obviously is a major concern for a lot of Americans, is the drug addiction and the issues that we're facing with a lot of this fentanyl coming across the border, which can lead us next to the next question, which is sanctuary states and the open border. So obviously, one of the biggest issues that we've seen is an increase in fentanyl coming across the border, which it's in line or comes in hand with the open borders. So
Right.
you know what's being done as far as the border in California. I mean, obviously, Biden shut the border down according to the media and what he's told everybody, which he said he couldn't do initially. So, what's really being done at this point with the border in
Mm,
California
mm,
and dealing with some of the issues that we're seeing as far as the fentanyl and the cartels using it to
yeah.
mule stuff back in and out?
So the story from the administration has changed over time. It was, I can't do it. Then it was, I don't want to do it without Congress because I want to look all democratic or whatever. Just his political posturing. And then, yeah, you're right. Then suddenly getting an executive order going, not really closing the border, but rather putting a quota on those that can come in, and
Right.
then making a bunch of exceptions that would just then lead to the same result that we've been having this entire time.
Yeah.
Exceptions including humanitarian exceptions that are then defined by the Department of Homeland Security. And as we know, Mayorkas, he's been complicit in this guy who's heading up that department, and he would no doubt use that to expand the scope to include everybody
Everybody.
who
Yeah.
just comes through a port of entry and claims asylum. And so that is just exposing a major problem that we've had with our border system, is that we have none. That's the reality. Is that we have none. We have people say the immigration system. Under this administration, we
We
have
don't
no
need it.
immigration
Yeah, we
system.
don't need it.
And so, no, well, they've discarded whatever laws were already in place, and not just the laws in place, but the laws that were being enforced. Because
Right.
everybody talks about the Trump administration policies, what they really were doing was just enforcing the law. Now,
Right.
what we have is um, an administration that's trying to appeal to the Democrat base by just, willy-nilly letting everybody in, having a free-for-all. And we know that it's detrimental to our security. And based on what we've seen with all these migrant killings, is that or killings of American citizens, is that we can't have that. I heard of a case of a guy going into a Chick-fil-A and shooting someone, illegal immigrant from Venezuela, two illegals from Venezuela raping a 12-year-old girl and killing her, and then another 15-year-old girl, also a casualty. So I heard of, I want to say, five or six different instances in which either Venezuelan or Ecuadorian illegal immigrants were involved in the killing or raping of some American citizen. So we know that this is a threat to the people that live here, that pay taxes here, that work here. Uh, you know, I think they're just going, what the heck? And securing the border might take killing some people. It might take killing some people, but I think, it's better that we do that than risk the lives of people that are citizens in this country.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it doesn't really help with, again, affordability when you're flowing in, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, because that's more people that need shelter, right? Which then limits how much housing we have for people who are already here, let alone those who are going to be seeking housing when they get here.
Hmm.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's twofold what this is going to do as far as the
Right.
U.S. economy.
Right. So that you're right. That is another problem exactly, is with the fact that we already have a homeless issue, and now we're going to have a migrant homeless issue. That's compounded on top of that, actually, and that's because most of these people, they come here without documentation, without federal work authorization, without any shelter, because they don't know where to go. It's not like, hey, I know five family members in Iowa. They don't know where they're going. In fact, that's why they're coming here. Some of them, many of them, are expecting freebies. I've said this for years. Immigrants have fueled our economy, but the ones coming now, they're not feeling crap. They're taking from us. They're taking the low income jobs, and that's one thing too, is they're accepting the lower wages and making them even lower income jobs. And then they're taking, the free food, whatever's being offered in certain blue big Democrat cities like New York City, Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles. So we're talking food, water, and some of these guys, they get apartments, they get hotels with more amenities than most Americans can actually brag about.
Yeah, and I mean, you start thinking about it, and it becomes a real issue with the fact that people are, we're as Americans, we're fighting for our lives, dealing with the daily cost of living here,
Hmm.
which again is another big issue. You know, we can't afford, basic necessities, while our social programs are giving these things to illegal immigrants or illegals who are coming across the border seeking asylum. And many of them are, from what we understand, people that have been released from prison. So the unwanteds in their own countries. So, I mean,
Yes.
where does it end, or where do we find a way past this, or at least to get through this?
Yeah, you're right. There is no screening process. We're not saying, hey, look, they have a record. Why don't we make sure that we keep them out? We're not even checking if they have a record or if they're wanted in another country. And we need to extradite these people to other countries. But the issue is some of these people don't want them, some of these countries. And I think we need a president that's capable, not necessarily of using force, but of bullying them into submission. And I say that because they need to understand, like, hey, look who's boss,
Yeah.
look who's in charge. Like you're gonna do this, or we're gonna sanction you, or we're gonna take this right or this privilege away from you. Like it has to be a sort of like there has to be some sort of threat involved that's not lethal or killing or anything, but there has to be some sort of, I would say economic is the biggest one that we can use as the United States of America. You know, hey, Venezuela, if you're not gonna let us extradite, Manuel Lopez, who has a record in your country, back to your country, then we're going to sanction you economically. We're not going to buy oil from you. We're going to tell our allies in NATO not to do deals with you or to buy oil from you. I mean, we need to use those kinds of levers because we have plenty of those kinds of like non-lethal levers that we can pull where they'll be like they'll have to get to a point where they acknowledge the fact that they would suffer economically if they didn't work with us.
Yeah. Or at least while we still do have that economic power, right?
At least while we still have that. Yeah, that's something we need to use. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying is we need probably a little bit better leadership.
Right.
So my question to you is that being in California, our current leader is Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
What's your take on the I guess the whisperings that he's being groomed to have some sort of presidential run?
Um, no. I'm like, no, thank you. I think we've had enough of him in California. I think we've already seen the dumpster fire and disaster he's created. You talked about the minimum wage, and one thing that's happening with that is that stores are closing. I mean, we're talking like McDonald's. I mean, we're talking like major food companies. You had these ideologues who were like, these are big corporations. They can easily afford $20 an hour. It's really that easy for them. But when you impose an additional 250, $300,000 a year labor cost on them, um, they have to raise their
The prices.
prices to match
Yeah.
that. And one thing they don't understand is, oh, McDonald's is a big corporation. Not exactly. You have
No.
individual franchisees who are probably middle class people just trying to make their way in America.
Yeah.
They bought this franchise. Maybe they had a load of savings, all right? Let's acknowledge that. But they bought the franchise because their goal was ultimately to give a better life, make a better life for themselves. And those franchises, they have to pay, McDonald's for, real estate fees, et cetera, because the business that McDonald's Corp is in is real estate, not the
Yep.
fast food. The fast food business is the business that each of the individual franchises are in. The franchisee is just the owner of that spot. Obviously, they have to listen to the corporation and whatnot, but they're not hauling, truckloads of money like people think that they are. And
Yeah.
so, people are like, well, they got to pay a higher wage. I mean, even Pizza Hut, those are franchised out. These people are probably barely making 90 to $100,000 a year if you really want to think about their salary. And now that they got to worry about paying their employees more, they have no choice but to raise the prices if they're going to keep up with life demands and life expenses and the expectations that there are for life. These ideologues make these assumptions, based on like, they have this idea in their mind that since McDonald's is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, that means that they get all that, that they own every location, everything's theirs. I think that's something they forget is that it's owned by franchisees who are probably they might be higher middle class, sure, but they're at the end of the day, they're not like super rich or anything. So
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at that industry, that they're on razor thin margins as far as what they're actually making money on,
right.
because again, the cost to purchase the goods to be able to sell it from McDonald's, the real
Hmm.
estate, they're paying for real estate fees. So, I mean, at the end of the day, and let's be honest, you mentioned, hey, what if it's $90,000 to $100,000? $90,000 to $100,000 is no longer what it used to be as far as a living wage here in California, especially.
Yeah, yeah. People forget about the profit margins. In the food industry, it's much narrower than it is in a lot of other industries. So to establish price controls for the food industry is probably the worst way to go.
Yeah,
It's probably the last place you should start at if you're going to do any minimum wage hikes or increases. I'm not an advocate of minimum wage hikes at all, but I look at it as though if you're going to do it, definitely don't start with the food industry because you are playing with fire. And look at what he's done. He's lost us 10,000 jobs. Imagine if he tried to get a $20 national minimum wage passed.
we'd
Biden's
be
like,
talking millions of jobs lost.
oh, we'd be talking millions of jobs lost. Exactly. Right now it sits at $7.50. and right now California is obviously double that, just about. And if we tried to impose that same policy across the nation, our economy would suffer massively. And so we can't be transporting California ideas to Washington, because if they failed in a state, this is a microcosm of what would actually happen on a much larger scale if they actually got to that point.
Yeah, and it's really strange because you see these people who actually still support him, and you wonder what world they're living in, especially here in California, because we're faced with it every day.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that if you ignore facts, you're still able to succumb to really any delusion. And I think that because they've ignored the fact that this has really come because of him, he's like the chief policymaker in chief, of California. Uh, then they glorify him, they worship him as like some sort of like God. I mean, once he brings up the social issues, which I think he's very good at, like, pandering to certain groups with that, I think people are just forgetful of what happens, at least on the economic or policy making end, and realizing how effective that actually is. It's like these guys, if they make one good post or five good posts on Pride Month, everybody forgets about the other 11 months in which they're making poor policy making decisions.
Right. I mean, and let's talk about it fiscally, right? So, California went from a surplus to a deficit in less than a year. And it's arguable that the surplus that we did have really wasn't a surplus. It was just money we were borrowing from the federal government.
Right, right. Yep, that's what they found.
And I mean, like you said, it's a microcosm, and you look at it, and a lot of people like you and I would argue that California is a pretty large welfare state in the sense that we have a lot of social welfare programs,
Correct.
and it's not working. I mean, there's Californians struggle to be able to afford to do the things they want to do. We have a housing issue, and you could literally look at it from the standpoint is that the fiscal policy of providing all these social welfare programs and all these minimum wages and things like that are what's really causing the inflation and the affordability crisis here in California.
Yeah, correct. Yep. This hike here now is causing that minimum wage hike is going to cause more affordability issues across the line. Undoubtedly, the cost of living is going up, and it's continuing to go up because of regulation. And I say this, I think that the real wage is $0, because no one's going to work for a wage they're not going to take.
Yeah.
No one, if $10 isn't enough for people, they're going to keep pushing these companies to keep pushing it up until they get to a point where it's satisfying enough for them, you
Right.
know?
I mean, that's capitalism. That's
Yeah,
that's how free markets work. And I think
exactly.
I align a lot with what you're saying, especially on your social media posts. And I think like the biggest problem that we're seeing is that it looks good and it sounds good in
It sounds
theory,
great.
right? But the biggest issue that we're facing is when they're implemented, are we seeing the issues that it's causing?
Mm,
And I think for me, one of the biggest problems that we're seeing in real estate is
mm,
inflation, right? So inflation has
mhm.
eaten away at people's savings. It's eaten away
Right,
at people's ability to afford things. And when we're talking about mortgages, people actually have to qualify for a home loan. So they have to have the income, and then they can't have a ton of debt. And when you're talking about home prices and interest rates have risen because of inflation,
right.
right? So it's compounding the problem. So for me, I think the biggest issue that we're looking at and that we're really trying to understand and look for some sort of leadership is somebody who's willing to step in and say, look, we have to start cutting back on a lot of these social welfare programs because they cost us a lot of money, and it's we don't have the revenue to afford these things, especially with the national deficit climbing monthly, daily, and there's no end in sight. So you know how again, I think you put it, we need a leader who's going to step in and say, look, we need to start changing how these things are done. But how much of that is going to have an impact or at least an effect on what's really happening? Because again, we have three branches of government. We have the legislative, judicial, and executive. And we all know the legislative branch still likes to pass laws that are putting hindrances on people, raising prices, and
Yeah.
providing additional social welfare.
Correct. Yep. And that's one of the big issues is California is spending a lot of money, but they're spending it in all the wrong places. And one of those things is they're giving freebies to illegal immigrants. Yeah, $6 billion in illegal immigrant healthcare. They're making billions of dollars in cuts in different places that are actually supposed to benefit California citizens, like
Right.
foster care, adoption, et cetera, but not
Education.
education. Right, education cuts because the teachers unions are going crazy over that.
Yeah.
But as far as the illegal immigration problem goes, they have no problem spending about $6.6 billion on giving them free healthcare in California, and so
Right.
that should just demonstrate to the nation the sort of priorities that these people have, which is to put people that are beyond our borders before the people that are within our borders.
Right.
And
And okay, so I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on for a second, right? So there's a lot of conspiracy theorists that believe what's being done is being done intentionally, to push us to kind of what is it called? Universal income,
Mhm.
and get people hooked on the system. So I mean, where do you? I mean, do you see, when talking to a lot of these politicians, do you see
I think,
the kind of an idea
yeah.
or at least some thoughts on this, and that's what they're doing, and there's a clear plan, or is this just a comedy of errors?
Yeah, I think that there has to be some truth in the fact that there is a combination of incompetence and also doing this on purpose. I think that there is a combination of both, because
Gotcha.
obviously there are a lot of failed decisions that they've made that I think are just because of lack of brain or stupidity or whatever. But then there are also things that they're doing because they want to appeal to a new voter base. These illegal immigrants, I think that they're bringing in, they're trying to bring in new voters, give them free food, give them free housing, give them free everything in the greatest country in the world. They'll probably have no problem voting for you. And as for this universal income, I think if you just destroy more and more businesses, which is what they're doing with this these policies, and
Right.
get everyone in the poverty, then you get them to a point where they eventually have to depend on the system. And I think right now people are already in that mindset because they're depending on the system to set wages for them. Which
Yeah.
in a true free market, you're not supposed to depend on the government to set the wages for you. We were all supposed to be sovereign. We were all supposed to be our own negotiators to where, hey, look, we were all supposed to be our own negotiators to where we would go, hey, look, Jack in the Box, $12 is not good enough for me. Make it
Yeah.
14 or make it 15, and then I can start working for you tomorrow.
Yeah. And I mean, that, I guess, for me, that's the part about it that I'm obviously. Did I lose you, Max? Oh,
Okay.
there we go.
All right,
Lost you
perfect.
there for a second, buddy.
Yeah, no, we're good.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think that's the part that I don't understand, and I guess my concern is that we all know that the legislators depend
Mhm.
a lot on their staff and the bureaucracy that we would like to call those that are lifers in the political system. So, obviously we talk about education, or we talked a little bit about education and the education system. Again, putting on the tinfoil hat, a lot of people are saying that the educational system has been kind of steering people towards an education that puts them in a position where when they're hired as staffers, their advice to their legislators is geared towards pushing this agenda. And I think for me, we hear about what is it, the 2025 Project 2025 and the agenda there. And it's almost like the Republican Party is willing to put out there exactly what their agenda is or what their plan is. But there's almost like this secret agenda going on for the left and what people are really pushing towards when it comes to the policies that we've seen implemented and continue to rise. So, I mean, when talking with some of the politicians that you talk to, um, do you see an incompetence level, or are you hearing from them that they're relying a lot on their staffers to give them the information on whether or not to vote for a policy, or is it just money?
I think it's both. I think there's a lot of money involved, and I think that they are having staffers give them information. I would say on the low level stuff that they're not really concerned with, the stuff that doesn't really involve a lot of money, but the stuff that does involve a lot of money, like I believe subverting democracy by taking this initiative to the state supreme court to get it taken off. That is something that they're actually conspiring to do. That is like something that they're like not stupid with, like they're actually trying to play us all for fools. Like this is where they're being strategic with what they do. Now when it comes to the liberal agendas, I mean obviously I think with a lot of that they're being pretty reckless, but when it comes to actually taking away our rights to vote, or taking away, or like I think Adam Carolla grilled Newsom on closing the beaches, like stuff like that. I think that it's not stupid. I think it's like purposeful stuff. I think those kinds of things are like the more like um trying to restrict people's freedoms and ability to do things. And one way they're actually subverting, I believe, democracy now is they're trying to get a competing. You're probably familiar with the Reform Prop 47 ballot initiative. The legislature now are acting on Newsom's bidding. This is last minute. No media is talking about this. I'll probably be one of the first to break this. To put a competing ballot measure against the Reform Proposition 47 ballot initiative. And from what I'm learning and understanding and reading from this piece of legislation that they just proposed that would turn into a ballot initiative on the ballot, if passed by 2/3 of each chamber, would make it so that if both are passed together, their ballot initiative would repeal what's in the
The
Reform
other,
Prop
oh wow,
47 ballot initiative. And right now they're acting on Newsom's bidding. This was negotiated behind closed doors. And
of
how
course,
I know is because um, I was at the Capitol this past week, and there were a lot of meetings going on, like a lot of secret meetings going on, and you could see signs that said "quiet in progress." And I was just eavesdropping a little bit on what was going on, but then the media was saying that there were negotiations going on. They just weren't sure what. And
right,
so, from what I'm hearing, not necessarily from the media, but just from what they're actually releasing, the piece, the text of what they're actually going to try to put on the ballot, is that they want to stop this citizen-led movement by putting Newsom's own ballot initiative to basically knock that down. And I
right,
think, and then let's consider this too. The attorney general gets to write the summary for the ballot initiatives,
oh
the
my god,
summaries.
right,
So, if they put both of these on, the attorney general can paint the reform ballot
right,
initiative in a
yep.
bad light and can paint their ballot initiative in a good light.
And we've all seen those, right? So you know what they want you to pass, and you know what they don't want you to pass when they're writing
And,
those.
and the sneaky thing is they're going on summer recess July 4th for 4th of July. That's their first day off. They plan on passing this late in the evening on July the 3rd to do it
Brutal.
without everybody looking.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy to think that our government is acting against our own ideas and what we want, and truly pushing things that would ruin how we look at things.
Yeah, no, and I think it's I think right now what we're seeing all this week right now at least is that Democrats are everything opposite of pro-democracy.
Yeah.
Everything that they're doing. This is not pro-democracy. This is tricking voters into voting against their will.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because let's talk about it. The ballot initiative itself was something that the citizens of the California decided they wanted on the ballot to pass
Yes.
because they wanted a little bit more control. They wanted to see some things, and now our government is putting a ballot initiative on there in complete opposition, which can supersede that ballot initiative that the citizens of California actually want to vote on and put on the ballot to pass.
Right, right. And they have done this throughout the years, and I will say this, another way that they're doing is they're lying about Project 2025 and making that like that's some scary fascist
Yep.
regime that Republicans are trying to impose on everyone. I saw an ad that Democrats are now pushing saying that Republicans are now going after condoms and all these other things. And obviously that's not true. That's fear mongering. I've never seen
Yeah.
a piece of legislation where Republicans are saying you can't have con and
Contraception,
the
right?
actual ad, believe it or not, had some lady at a counter and some dude trying to purchase them, and she was like checking off these things on a checklist. Are you married? Are you in a serious relationship? Is this your girlfriend? Is this your first date? And making it like they're just gonna interrogate you at the counter if you try to get these because that's what Republicans want. And I'm like, what
Wow.
kind of delusion are you living in to be like to be that disingenuous? You know, you
Yeah.
have like you're that is very disingenuous. And they're saying things like Project 2025 wants to accomplish a lot of these things, like restricting that kind of, you know, whatever sexual freedom, whatever you want to call it. But um, a lot of what is in Project 2025, or at least the people that wrote Project 2025, have absolutely no affiliation almost with the Republican Party or with
Right.
Donald Trump. This is an independent group called the Heritage Foundation. It's a Christian group,
Yeah.
and they wrote this.
Yeah.
And because they want to, that they're the group that's actually hoping to become a big part of the next administration. They're hoping that they can breed the staff members for the next Trump administration, that they can
Yeah.
breed, you know, the next people that are going to be working on the new groups of people that will be working on Capitol Hill, etc. That doesn't mean they'll get their wish, but they have no little to no, I mean, Trump has never said I endorse Project 2025. He has Agenda 47, which is something that he's absolutely pushed. This is something that's on his website. You can see all these different policy proposals that he's come up with. But as for Project 2025, it's a very, I would say it's a very Christianized version,
Evangelical, very much so.
evangelical version of Republican policymaking.
Yeah.
And so that's what they're hoping for is that they're hoping that Republicans will integrate that as part of their policy making. But right now, that's far from guaranteed.
Yeah.
And so I don't know why people are pushing a lot of that fear mongering, but I just had to
Well,
put that out there.
we both know why. Propaganda is rampant at this point in time in our lives. We can look back and see, a lot of what Obama did by, taking care of the fact that now our media can lie to us and they can actually use propaganda against their own people, which was something we didn't allow prior to that. So if you're in the know and you actually understand kind of what things used to be and the way they are now, you can really see that the fear mongering, the gaslighting, and the propaganda machines are running at high level right now to really get people, I guess, fired up because they know with emotion they can get people to vote and do things that they need them to do. And if they're fear mongering them, it gets them going in the right direction.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's exactly what they're doing. There's a battery that they're trying to charge that's against that's against Donald Trump, but for all the wrong reasons, mind you,
Right.
because and honestly, um I'm pretty Christian myself. I mean, I agree with a lot of like what I've seen
Morals
as
and
far as what
values.
they've proposed, those moral things. But as far as policy making, I don't know that that's what's being instilled in the next Trump agenda or
Yeah.
administration,
Yeah,
so to
I mean,
speak.
don't get me wrong. I would agree with you. I'm pretty Christian, and I feel like secularism is kind of destroying this country, because we've
Yeah.
lost a lot of the morals and values that we used to have that would put people in better positions and at least have the wherewithal to push through it and make some very good decisions. So getting back to the cost of things, obviously with real estate in California, we talked about how there's a lot of the fees associated with building. We've talked about how our government is building homeless shelters that are exorbitant costs compared to what they actually are. So my question to you is, do you see anything happening as far as the agenda with the politicians who may not line up with what's going on and a push for them in California, or is California a lost cause?
Well, I have to put it this way. I don't when I go to that place and when I go to that state capital, I don't look at it as the people's house because it's not the people's house. I mean, neither is DC really, but
No.
but but I don't look at it as the people's house because the interests that control it are very powerful. And I think that when people vote, or that they're gonna get the government that they wish for, they're gonna get what they want, And if you're so opposed to a little bit of common, if you're so opposed to, the right wing conservatives, that makes you reject common sense, that makes you reject common sense policies, then you're gonna get what you deserve.
Yeah.
And right now, that's what California is getting.
So
And
what
as
you're seeing
long
is a lot of polarization.
there's a lot of polarization, and that's the problem because there's a huge set of values that I think the majority of us agree on. But I think that the problem with the polarization comes from hyper focusing on a lot of issues that don't actually matter.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fog, there's a lot of smoke, and a lot of those partisan issues are I mean, they involve culture wars, they involve race wars, dividing people by class, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that those are the issues that matter.
No.
And I think that if we resorted to common sense policymaking, a lot of those problems would be resolved. But because people aren't in the frame of mind to actually want to vote those things in or vote for those things or hold the people that they put in to account for those things, they're going to have these issues for the generations to come.
Yeah. I mean, and you want to get into it real deep, we can talk about campaign finance because, I mean, if you talk to most politicians, once they're elected, they're immediately back out campaigning and fundraising because it's a numbers game, right? And so
Right.
the more money they can bring in, the more likely that they're going to be in power for the foreseeable future. So instead of focusing on the issues that matter and voting on things, they're pandering to a small few people with a lot of money to get the fundraising, and that fundraising comes with strings attached, right?
Hmm. Yes, it does. The strings attached include vote for this legislation, vote for this thing, and vote for that thing.
Yeah.
And that's normally what it is. It's a quid pro quo kind of a deal. And like you said, the majority of the time, I think, is not spent helping people. It's spent trying to figure out, the next campaign. And the
Yeah, where
cycle
the
just
next dollar's
repeats.
coming from.
Yeah, where the next dollar is coming from. So either it's getting nothing done, or it's getting everything done, but for these interests that are paying you to help you out for the next election. At least getting nothing done for the actual constituency because they're not the constituency. They're individual people, but they're not the constituency is the collective. The what do the people as a whole want?
Right.
And they're not getting what they want. They're not getting what they want either out of Sacramento or out of
DC.
DC. And that's the case because of ignorance,
Yeah.
ignorance, not paying attention, not focusing on issues that matter, maybe listening to a lot of the media lies. And like I said, that's how it's going to be for the generations to come because people have chosen this. They haven't, we've done this to ourselves. No one else has
Yeah.
done this to us.
So I got a question for you, and it's kind of off the wall, but have you been following Javier Milei in Argentina?
I have, yeah, and I like him a lot, and I think he's tremendous for that country.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, you want to talk about it. I mean, he's an economist, right? He got elected and he came in and he started cutting the bureaucracy as much as he could, which cut spending. And you've seen inflation go down in Argentina. And, I guess my question for you is that do you see something like that ever happening here in the United States?
the bureaucracy getting cut, not in a long time, because that is it's like you said, our executive branch is so expansive. I can imagine it's much more expansive than even Argentina's. And I know
Yes.
Argentina has a lot of bureaucracy, but I say that because we have a much bigger budget. We're dealing with a lot more people here, and we're dealing with a lot more issues here. And so one in one way or another, I think some of these agencies are going to write their own rules to make it so that their employees can't get fired. They're going to try
Gotcha.
and shield them. They're going to try and shield them from being fired. They've done it before. I think they would do it again.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's I guess that's really sad for us because I mean these are unelected people holding government offices that are writing rules and laws and spending our money that we don't necessarily have.
Right. Right, and they're putting it in places that, how do we know where the investment's going? We had the infrastructure bill, and that was supposed to involve a lot of electric vehicle chargers and stuff being built, and I don't remember really anything being built from that. And so you
It,
start to think, is this some sort of money laundering scheme? I mean, what is this? Are they establishing a slush fund? I mean,
yeah, I
because
mean, well, I think I heard somewhere that I don't know if it was a CHIPS Act. It was I think it was in the infrastructure app, and it was talking about bringing high-speed internet to every home in the United States. And from what I understand, they have not laid a single line of
oh,
cable for the high-speed internet.
yeah, because there's also the Inflation Reduction Act, but I think there's also the American Rescue Plan Act. I think the American Rescue Plan Act was probably the one that had the internet in it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was like $24 billion and not a single cent, or it's all hung up with
Yeah.
the legislative branch unwilling to allow them to move forward because of DEI and some other things because they can't find workers
Hmm.
who fit their policy.
Right. Well, at least in the last couple years, Biden hasn't gotten a whole lot of legislation passed because Congress only got 27 bills through in 2023. So, I mean, I would say even though we've had a pretty unproductive Congress, that hopefully limits the impacts that this administration has. But at the same time, with how bureaucratic it is, it really hasn't because because they figured that instead of working with the legislature, since they had at least Chevron deference on their side for so long, they could just make rules on their own
Yeah.
since they had those divisions that they couldn't quell or solve.
Well, which is funny because you mentioned that Biden hasn't been very effective as far as policy, but when you listen to some of the other people, they'll tell you that Biden's gotten more done than any other president as far as legislation and getting things done. But
Yeah.
that's when you start questioning, okay, so he got some sort of legislation passed, the Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS Act, but is that money actually being allocated and used properly and done? Because in the grand scheme of things, what we're hearing is that it's tied up and nothing's been done with it.
Yeah, I don't know that it's accurate or that anything's been done with it. I mean, the president is responsible for releasing the funds that Congress provides to him. It's in the legal U.S. code. Um, but has he been releasing it to places that have not been authorized by them? He's abused power plenty of times. I mean, he even asserted executive privilege over some of these audio recordings that
Yep.
had to do with, between him and Merrick Garland, as far as what's going on with the pending January 6 cases. And nothing's really been said or done on that so far. Although Merrick Garland has been held in contempt of Congress for refusing to provide those audios. And this is where Congress comes in. If the president isn't doing what he's supposed to do, they've got to hold him accountable.
Yeah. Well, and I think a big issue for the right side of things is they're looking at it from a perspective: do we push to remove him because he's their candidate, he's the
Hmm.
president, or do we allow him this to run its course because we all saw the debate and those of us who have a working brain understood and saw that that person that was up on the stage, our president, was not of sound mind and not conveying strength and leadership that we need for our president. So is there going to be a push, or do you see them kind of stepping back and let them, take this ship down?
Um, as far as the J6 cases go, I think that they're going to try and stick with them. I think that they're going to try and prosecute them under the narrow definition of obstruction that the Supreme Court has given, or maybe they won't. Maybe they won't even follow the law because a lot of these guys don't really follow the law at the end of it, anyways.
Yeah.
But I think that they're going to keep using the lawfare to its end. I think they would use. I mean, I think even if the Supreme Court came out tomorrow and said you can't prosecute any January 6 cases, they would still do it.
Right.
Because,
Yeah.
Biden's got his US attorneys at hand, he's got the Justice Department. He can go after anyone or anything. I mean,
And obviously they've rallied, the left to believe that the SCOTUS is uh, a right wing crazy people who are going after everything.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously said that mifepristone abortion pill is fine in states. People thought they were going to get rid of that, and like I said, people are fear-mongering about what the Supreme Court Republicans desire to do. I mean, I know that there's fear-mongering about Clarence Thomas invalidating interracial or same-sex marriages, and even though there's nothing going on with that at all, there's nothing to
Yeah.
indicate that that would happen. Um, but yeah, I think, like I said, that's what they want. They want people to think that they're a far right activist, extremist court and that they're illegitimate, you know?
Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, that's the other part about this I keep hearing, we should disband the Supreme Court, or we should pack the courts. And it's like, this is democracy. This is, or I guess this is what our founding fathers decided was our republic. We had three branches, and it was important that we had it because it was checks and balances for all of them. But when you hear somebody say, look, we want to get rid of one of those branches, how do they come up with this stuff? Because I mean, in the grand scheme of things, this is something that we put in place to protect the democracy in the United States.
right, yeah. And where does it end, right? Because um, you know, we've got people thinking that Biden's an illegitimate president, and then we've got people thinking that the Supreme Court is illegitimate, and so and then we've got people, large American distrust in Congress at large. And so
Yeah, and I mean, like
nobody
you
thinks
said, there's a
anything's
lot of
legitimate.
polarization going on,
Yeah, we're getting to a point where really nobody thinks anything is legitimate anymore, you
right?
know?
So yeah, I mean,
Who's
just
gonna rule
anarchy,
over you?
right?
Yeah, I mean, who's gonna rule over you? I think that's a concern too. Um, but yeah, like you said, there's a lot of polarization, and I think that the Supreme Court, I think that the way that people are framing them, essentially, or painting them, is just adding to that division.
Yeah.
Anyways, I gotta go in a few minutes, but
All
yeah,
right, man.
I
Hey,
appreciate you
thank you
having.
for coming on and chatting with me. This was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, no, thank you very much. Yeah,
I'll talk to you soon, man.
I'll talk to you soon.